Flight boss, bitch. You know. For sure. You're not listening to the Mind of an Terry's Move. I'm the Archangel Uriel, and I'm here to carry out God duties and motherfucking responsibilities. And I'm just throwing out a few philosophical videos out there real quick, because I ain't get to throw no videos out. I'm going in tomorrow, though, well, later on today. But for the most part, don't take these videos too deep, but if you are into philosophy, then you can utilize my videos for your arguments and this, that, and the third. Because, this channel right here is Ratchet Philosophy. Yeah, Ratchet Philosophy. And this little short philosophical video right here is going to be about the problem with free will. The issue with free will. Now, it's a bunch of dumbass, long, drawn-out arguments all over the internet about the issue with free will, the problem with evil, this, that, and the third. And you need to know the motherfucker, one main reason with motherfucking free will is motherfucking men and women keep coming up with philosophical points of views on trying to determine every goddamn thing. That's the goddamn problem with free will. Now, I believe in free will, and I'm going to break this down because free will is backed and supported by the energy signature of chaos. But before we dive into that, I'm going to break it down. Now, here's the thing. Men and women keep trying to determine every goddamn thing. And that becomes a resistance towards the energy of what you want to call free will. That becomes the opposing energy of what we want to decipher what free will actually is. And you need to know this. The reason why men and women keep trying to determine every goddamn thing, because they have a hard time with wrapping their head around randomness. You see what I'm saying? They have a hard time with wrapping their head around something that's able to happen at random. So for the most part, men and women keep trying to come to conclusions of determination. Even all the way down to the point that there's actual arguments that's called free will versus determination. Or determinism, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But for the most part, it gets that motherfucking lost when we get men and women lost in their philosophical indoctrinations. You see what I'm saying? So for the most part, they get lost into the concept of wrapping their head around things random, right? And then they even get lost when getting into an argument with you. Because, look, they even say some shit like, okay, well, for you to even do something random, it was planned. You had to determine that you was about to do something random. So here's how you even defeat that, right? Because free will does exist. It's a small percentage level within this realm of reality. So what do I mean by that, right? Here's how you defeat that, right? This goes into the concept of someone who's probably mentally challenged and needs to be in a straitjacket, right? But end up walking on a freeway, so they're not really aware of what they're doing because they're mentally challenged, and they walk on the freeway and get hit by a car and kill themselves. So for the most part, you could say that was a random event. So for the most part, now, once they want to get lost into their indoctrinations and say, okay, well, there's still a higher version of determinism because they walked in a freeway, and the freeway consists of a street that resigned of cars, and cars had to be predetermined in some type of, you know what I'm saying? And then that's when you get just have to say a motherfucker and start to get lost into their motherfucking indoctrinations, because as I brought back into the percentage level again, there is a sense of randomness, because just because something or the circumstance that the motherfucker who had a mental instability walked into, just because that situation was kind of backed and supported by something that was predetermined, aka a street, a highway that cars could ride on, doesn't mean that it was predetermined for that mentally challenged person to walk amongst that freeway. So that mentally challenged person was still backed and supported by the energy signature of chaos, aka a small percentage of what we call randomness. You see what I'm saying? So there is an existence of randomness. So for an example, when something happen to be random, here's where consciousness or experience or influence or the ability to see something objective or the noumenal or the ability to observe something or to have a point of reference towards something can derive the first time. You see what I'm saying? That's when we get into that concept of free will. When something actually happens random, and then once something happens random, everything that derives after that random event can actually observe that as it being an object, and then the subjects that get derived from that object can kind of come with a subjective point of view, and then all the subjects that come with a subjective point of view, the better that they can relate and agree with that subjective point of view, it becomes the objective reality of that noumenal. And the noumenal is something that's there on its own as an individual, set aside from what's observing it. You see what I'm saying? So for the most part, here's where the noumenal even gets created. It gets created from a subjective point of view. So even when you want to get into subjectivity and objectivity, right? These are some synonymous, one and the same. Because you can even break this down into space. Just say overall space. All space is space, right? But once you get into the concept of space, you start to understand that there's always going to be space within space. So I don't care if you go to the smallest dot in the world, the smallest dot, there's always going to be a space. There's always going to be many spaces within that space, within that small space. And a dot is just a small space. But a small space, you can look at it as singular, but the closer you get to it, is always going to be a multitude of spaces. So here's where you try to derive and extract the wisdom and knowledge and the information of where we get into the concept of objectivity and subjectivity. For there's something to even exist to be objective, there have to be subjectivities. So there's always going to be multitude of something that goes into the objective of something. So here's where we get into light, and don't even get lost into the concept of Greek or demotic or hieroglyphic versions of how they're trying to teach you what light mean, because they'll teach you in the scientific terms, and they'll give you an understanding of it, but not giving you an understanding, a true understanding, to the point you go overstand it. So when we talk about light, don't look at light as in light the way the scientist is trying to teach you, but in certain ways utilize their words. So when you're utilizing light, utilize light as in what? Light as in weight. So now you're going to say, wait, scientists ain't talking about that, because they're talking about light spectrums. They're talking about light rays. They're talking about particles, and it's a wave, and once you observe it, you see the piece of the wave, so it becomes a particle. You see a piece of the whole objective of something, right? Before you get lost, right? Ask them what is in a particle and how you are able to observe it. And the moment that they tell you, because they never seen one, but the moment that they're going to tell you the reason that they observe it is why? Because it has what? Mass. So what is mass? Mass is their version of being able to measure something. And when you're able to measure something, you can measure the length, the width, and what else? The weight. So when we're talking about particles and light rays and like, look, I dropped out of high school, and I ain't got, look, we talking about just understanding life, and this is how you can understand motherfucking shit. You see what I'm saying? Now check this out. Scientists will be able to learn from this, and they already know what I'm talking about. See how that works? They just talking about a more indoctrinated version of what I'm talking about. Now when we're talking about mass, this is how they're able to observe it. Now, mass is the weight of it, so they're able to see the effect or the influence of it. So when you got a bunch of different masses, aka something that is light in weight, a mass is light in weight, so we have to observe it in different measurements, because it's light in weight. So the lighter something is in weight, here's where we get into the concept of the term mass. Now, since it's light in weight, the more objects that's light in weight come together, it becomes the shape and form of whatever these things are. And the general shape and form of it becomes the object. So all the many subjects make the object, right? So for the most part, that becomes a light or a spectrum or a ray. So a many multitude of lights, something that is light in mass. So now we have to understand, what is it now? And here's where we get into concepts of, they want to call it the atom or the neutrons and things of that nature. And I like to call it a spark of idea, an imagination, a thought form. So here's the thing. A thought form is light in mass, because you haven't heavily invested in it emotionally yet for it to emotionally affect you and for you to act upon it so it can influence other people to be in that fluid and feel the vibration of it, to see where you're actually coming from, swimming from, so they can see where you're coming from, spiritually see, swimming. See what I'm saying? See what direction and angle. If it's an arch angle, low angle, demonic angle, or a logic and rational angle, try to anchor something down into your demonic natures. You see what I'm saying? Now, when you make a whole bunch of things that's light and mass together, it becomes heavy. And something that becomes heavy condenses. And if you're lost into that spiritually, that light becomes darkness, because you're blinded by so many small spectrums of light. It's heavy now. And each light is an idea. And if you got too many ideas, too many logics about one spectrum, one space, you become into your own lost into your own darkness. And this is where things get derived from. We're being indoctrinated. Now, you have to understand this, right? When we're talking about free will, Free will, everybody has the choice to do something random. Now, when we talk about random, random is backed and supported by something that is in resistance or opposing to something that is seen as a routine, something that is seen as a procedure, something that is seen as a pattern. So this is kind of the realm of reality that we are in right now. Since it's moving so slow, this kind of can let you know what dimension that we are in, which is the third dimension. Now, random. So for the most part, you want to go into a more lost philosophical argument than that, then you could say, well, what's maybe random in this dimension may not be random in a higher dimension. But there will be the same argument. So for the most part, just by me being able to have the idea to come up with this argument, that argument would exist in all realms of realities in some form of frequency or in some form of vibration. So there's always going to be a sense of chaos. There's always going to be a sense of randomness, which means there's always going to be a sense of free will, aka something happening without a reason behind it. So when something happens random, that means there was no reason behind it. And without a reason, that means there was no determination. There was nothing determined. Because for the reason will be the determined. So if I came up and say I'm about to do something random, then the reason then behind me about to do something random will be what I determined. That will be the determinism of it. But when something actually occurs random, it was no reason for that to happen. So it was undetermined. Same way as the mentally challenged person walking in the middle of the freeway, not being aware of what they're actually doing. So that was an undetermined, undecided action. And it was something that was basically, that just happened. So it was undetermined. So that is an actual example of showing you free will in some way, shape, or form. Now, the reason why this become arguments and things of that nature is because of theological point of views, epistemology, ontology, the ability to try to give a whole objective morality reason behind somebody's epistemology, that's ontology, or the forms of being lost and indoctrinated. That's where all these things come from. See what I'm saying? So you have to keep that in mind. Now, you can do something that's undetermined in your life. But since you're so spiritually lost from that spectrum of life, that might get a little scary. See what I'm saying? But at the same time, it's there. Free will is there. It's just your mind frame of looking at it. Because your mind frame may be in an argument or in debate fashion or in a way of looking at it because of how theologians looking at it. And therefore, the arguments that you may derive to come to the conclusion to actually win a debate will still put you into a form of indoctrination when it comes to these things. So keep that in mind also. So the problem with free will, there is no problem with free will. And there is free will. It becomes a problem when motherfuckers keep trying to determine every goddamn thing. So when a motherfucker try to determine the free will of your goddamn space, then your free will becomes an actual problem to the point that you end up not seeing free will. Then that years and years go down the line to the point that arguments and debates get derived out of this dumbass shit. Flight boss, bitch. Goddamn air. Archangel Uriel. Love y'all.